Hi, I'm Rob from Seattle. Today I brought a few watches here with me into New York. I got into watch collecting probably about 10 years ago. Always had a passion for watches. I just love the idea that you've got this mechanical piece of equipment like a small engine that somebody's designed and handcrafted, and it's a technology that dates back hundreds of years, and that just a real fascination with time itself and how watches function and the enjoyment too of wearing them and collecting. I only brought 4 pieces out of my collection today, but probably my favorite watch right now is my Vacheron Patrimony Blue Dial. I love this watch. It's a watch that I grew to really appreciate as I started collecting. I'd say that at the beginning of my collection journey, I probably wouldn't even understood the value or the price of this watch, as it's a time only, no second hands. And I ended up with this watch. I started a quest for wanting a real, true men's dress watch. I started noticing that my collection really seemed to feature a lot of steel, metal bracelets, and I didn't really have anything on leather. And I wanted something that was really elegant that I could wear, formal, black tie or suit to weddings, things like that. And I wanted to try and stay really true to the tradition of a dress watch, which is, no date complication, not even a second hand, very thin. I did break my own rule a little bit. This is a 40 mil, but I do wear a 7.5 to 7.25 inch wrist, so it fits me well. I really appreciate Vacheron as being the oldest of the holy trinity of watches, if you think of AP and Patek and Vacheron. This watch, it's only about 4.5 millimeters thick, and then they've kind of really angled the tumble home here to give it even a lower profile. And it's kind of amazing. I mean, it's got the solid case back, or else, just an exhibition case back would be too thick, or the watch would be too fragile as well. But underneath is a Geneva seal movement, just finished as well as anything being produced anywhere in Switzerland, but really only your watchmaker would know. I take a unique pride and pleasure in that, just knowing that somebody took the time to put all that craftsmanship in and work that nobody will really appreciate unless you take the back off. But I'm very active with my collection. I haven't even counted it recently. I have probably about 12 pieces total, and I rotate probably every 2 to 3 days. I rarely stay in a watch more than 3 days. But lately, one of my newer pieces is this Omega Seamaster. It's for the Tokyo 2020 games, and I love this watch. I think it's very classy. It's got a good business casual look. I added the Omega leather strap, but it is from the Omega boutique, replaced the steel bracelet. This has just been a fun, gorgeous watch. I get a lot of compliments on it. And I'm finding too that, and the same is true with the Vacheron that I was just talking about before, is manual wind. I'm really enjoying manual wind, and that was something else that I grew to appreciate in my collecting. I would have never probably considered a manual wind when I first got into watches. I had to have an automatic. But there's something very unique and personal about getting up in the morning and setting that time and doing that manual wind. I don't know, it's a very satisfying thing. I think that until you buy one, you won't fully appreciate it, but trust me, if you don't have a manual wind, get at least one manual wind watch. You'll enjoy it. And I'd say if I'm not in that, I've been wearing, of course, the Pepsi a lot. This watch doesn't really need any introduction. There's been so much said about it. It's just a great piece. I mean, who doesn't love it? I love the history behind it, that it was designed for Pan Am pilots. Let's see, I got this in 2019. So it's the Mark II, I believe. So it does have the darker blue bezel, which is nice. And those are probably the 2 watches I wear the most. And then, because I'm traveling in here in New York, the last watch I choose to bring with me, and a lot has to do with the fact that I just picked this up about a week ago. And I got a call from a dealer, and unfortunately at the moment I was actually at the hospital and having a small procedure done. I won't get into that, but got the call, and so I sent the wife and said, go pick this up while I'm in the hospital, and she did. And it's a Sky Dweller dual tone 18 karat yellow gold with the black dial. But I really like this watch. It's flashy. Almost more than I feel than the solid gold version for some reason. It wears very large at 42 millimeter, and as I said, I have a large wrist, and this watch just commands a lot of attention, a lot of flash. But the annual calendar function, and it's so unique, and the tech behind it with the rotating bezel to set the different times, super cool. Nobody making anything like it with this movement. So a lot of props to Rolex for coming up with something so unique. Was not on my list of watches, but I'm actually really glad to have this in my collection now. I get asked that a lot. Why do I collect watches? And I got to say, it started pretty young for me. I grew up in pretty humble beginnings, and I'd like to joke and say I'm Texas trailer trash, which is true. I grew up in a trailer park in Texas, and I was lucky enough though to have a pretty awesome grandfather, and he had a good friend of his as well that was kind of like a second grandpa to me. And when I turned 12, he bought me a Timex, and it was on leather, and just time only. And I remember it was steel with a blue dial, and it was my first adult watch. And then, of course, through my 20s, like a lot of guys, and like I said, I didn't make a lot of money even then, and so my collection consisted of a lot of Casios and Citizens, and I did some sailboat racing back then, so I had a Navahawk, or Navasail, I'm sorry, the Citizen Navasail watch, and that was really where I'd say I started collecting. And then eventually I hit a point where you start realizing, man, I keep buying these $100, $300, $400 watches, and it's like if I just quit doing that, I could own one really nice piece. So then I got really strict. I cut myself off, and I was like, no more watches. Either you're going to buy a good watch or you're not. But my wife then was not into watches at all. She didn't understand my fascination at all. And I remember we were on vacation, and we were in I think we were in the Caribbean, and I walked into one of those duty-free shops, and Omega was in there, and the Planet Ocean line had just launched, and so of course it was heavily featured in boutique. And I was there on a diving trip, did a lot of diving, and as I mentioned before, I was sailing. I just always spent a lot of time on the water, either on boats, in the water, under the water, wherever. And so for me, it was destined. Okay, it's a James Bond watch, it's a Planet Ocean, all this stuff, and but I didn't know anything about watches, and but I had, like I said, my ex-wife with me, and I was trying on this watch, and she's like, "How much is that?" And I think it was like, the one I was looking at was about $5,000, and she almost got mad. Like, I see it on her face. She's like, "That is just ridiculous, insane. Like, that is just stupid. I don't know why anybody would spend that kind of money on a watch." And so I was like, "Whoa, well, I know that's over." No watch for me. Didn't really think about collecting anymore, and then you end up meeting somebody else, and somebody that like love of my life, and we happen to go walking by, and there's an Omega boutique, and this whole thing comes flooding back to me like, oh, the last time I was here, and they had these Planet Ocean watches, and they were so cool. And I remember saying to my now wife, I said, "Hey, I'd like to go in there and take a look at watches. I used to love Omega watches." And so we go in there, and there it is, Planet Ocean line again, and these Seamasters. And I'm talking with the lady, and she's like, "Yes," and it's got the 3319 or 3313, 3313 movement in it. Well, we had gotten married, and our anniversary is 31313. And so it's like, oh, here's this movement, it's the 3113, and it's the watch that I wanted, and I'm putting this watch on, and my wife's like, "What do you think of that watch? You like it?" And I go, "I love it. I've wanted one of these forever." And she just says, "You're buying it. We're buying it." And she actually picks it out and insists that I get it. And that was my entrance into the luxury watch game right there, was the Omega Planet Ocean Seamaster. I gotta say, I've got a pretty rounded out collection now. I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm not sure what the future holds for me still in watches. I can't imagine a time where I'm not still collecting and wearing watches. I'm not above selling. That first watch, did have some sentimental, but it was just so big and heavy that I just wasn't enjoying it. Truth be told, I actually ended up with some nerve damage in my left hand, so you'll notice I always wear my watches on the right. And that Seamaster was so heavy, it would actually give me nerve pain. And turn these two fingers to sleep. So I had to get out of that watch. It was just so big. So there are certain watches that I'll probably keep, and some of them I view as investment pieces as well. I think you're foolish if you're not looking at that in your collecting. It's not a big motivator for me. I still buy a lot of watches that I like. I have a Tag Heuer Monaco, for instance. It was kind of cool and fun to buy that on the 60th anniversary. So I don't think you should always let price dictate. I think it's smart, to shop around. Don't be afraid of the secondary market or gray market to get the value that you want. But I don't believe in letting. It's very soulless to me if you're only collecting for the economic value of it. And also I'm a little disappointed on what it's doing to the watch market, to be honest.